Chosen one, wealth is coming. Florence Scovel explained the sign you're seeing. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the signs you keep noticing in your outer world are never accidents. They are the universe answering a call you already made in consciousness long before your eyes ever caught the evidence. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, verse 24, it is written, "Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear." And Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The answer is already moving, before the request is even finished being spoken," which means the number you keep seeing, the sudden idea, the kind stranger, the door that keeps opening in your imagination is not luck dropped in your lap. It is supply already in motion, already answering, already on its way to you. And here is where most people miss it completely. They believe the sign itself is the treasure. So they chase it, they watch for it, they wait for it to repeat one more time before they will finally believe. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a sign is only ever a whisper from your own consciousness, confirming what you have already accepted as true. So the very way most people try to receive their wealth, by watching and waiting and hoping the sign shows up again, is the very habit that keeps them standing outside a door that has been open the entire time. So before we open the keys, let us plant a new word in your mouth right now, a 3-part decree that turns you from a watcher of signs into a doer of the word. Say it with me. I am the chosen vessel for my own good. Wealth is already coming to meet me. My word is my wand. Again, I am the chosen vessel for my own good. Wealth is already coming to meet me. My word is my wand. If something in you just went quiet when you spoke that, if you felt a door move somewhere inside your chest, type the 2 words, God supplies, in the comments right now. Let it be your seal, and let us begin. The first key is this. The sign is not the miracle. The sign is the receipt. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the outer world is only ever a screen upon which the inner world is projected. So when you keep seeing the same number on the clock, the same phrase in 3 separate conversations, the same bird landing near your window 3 mornings in a row, it is not the universe teasing you with a hint of something that might come later. It is consciousness handing you a receipt for a payment already made in the unseen. Think of a woman who orders a package online. She does not stand at the mailbox waiting for the confirmation email to decide whether she actually ordered it. The email simply confirms what she already set into motion with her own decision and her own payment. She placed the order in private, quietly, before anyone else knew, and only afterward does the outer world begin sending its little updates, its little tracking numbers, its little proofs that the thing is already moving toward her door. And this is exactly how supply works. You plant the acceptance first in feeling and in word, and only then does the outer world begin sending you its little receipts, its little confirmations, its little winks. Now picture that same woman if she had never actually placed the order, and yet stood at the mailbox every day anyway, hoping an email might arrive out of nowhere, hoping a package might show up that she never truly claimed. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is precisely what so many people do with their own good. They wait at the mailbox of life, watching for a sign, without ever having quietly placed the order within their own consciousness first, and then when nothing arrives, they call it bad luck, when really, there was simply no claim made for the mail to confirm. So when you see the sign again this week, do not ask, what does this mean is coming? Ask instead, what did I already accept that is now confirming itself? Because it is not the sign that brings the wealth. It is the accepted state behind the sign that brings the wealth. The sign is only ever the mailman, never the gift. And once you stop worshipping the mailman, and start recognizing the gift you already signed for, the whole chase ends, and the receiving begins. This week, when you notice your particular sign, whatever it is for you, Pause right there on the sidewalk or in your kitchen and quietly say, "I see the receipt, the payment is already made," and let that be enough. Let that be complete in itself. Do not run to tell 5 people. Do not need it to repeat twice more before you believe it. Simply receive the receipt the way you would receive any confirmation you already expected. With a calm, quiet, settled nod, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a grateful, settled recognition of the sign does more for your supply than any amount of anxious watching for the next one ever could. And once this quiet trust becomes your habit, you are no longer a person hunting for signs. You are simply a person who ordered well and is now, calmly, watching the delivery arrive. I see the receipt, and I bless the payment already made. The second key is this: the world you see is only ever mirroring the self you have agreed to be. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught over and over that no situation can correct itself until self is corrected, meaning the sign you see is never really about the outer event at all. It is a mirror held up to your own self-concept, showing you plainly what you currently believe yourself worthy to receive. Consider a man who has quietly decided, somewhere beneath his own awareness, that he is the kind of person who almost makes it, but never quite arrives. Watch his life. The raise gets delayed by 1 cycle. The check arrives but is slightly smaller than expected. The deal falls through by a hair at the final signature, and he calls this bad luck. He calls this timing. He calls this the economy. But Florence Scovel Shinn would gently take him by the shoulders and say, "No, this is not luck. This is your self-concept, faithfully, precisely, lovingly mirrored back to you by a universe that cannot argue with your own word about yourself." Now walk into a second kitchen, a second ordinary evening, and meet a woman who is about to ask her manager for a raise. She has more than earned. She has rehearsed the number in the shower. She has rehearsed it in the car. And yet the moment she sits down across the desk, her voice goes small. She lowers the number before anyone has even challenged her. She adds the word maybe. She adds the word if that is even possible. And the manager, hearing a request already shrinking itself, offers exactly half of what was asked. And she walks out telling herself the timing was simply not right this quarter. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the timing was never the true obstacle in that room. The mirror was. She carried in a self-concept that had already agreed, long before that meeting, that she was someone who asks small and receives smaller, and the outer negotiation had no real power to overrule what had already been decided within. The manager was not being cruel. The manager was simply the glass, reflecting back the exact shape she had already handed it. Here is the mercy hidden inside this teaching. If the outer world is only a mirror, then you were never actually fighting circumstances at all. You were only ever having a conversation with a reflection, and no one wins an argument with their own reflection by yelling at the glass. You win it by changing the face. Think of it the way you might think of an actual mirror hanging on your own wall at home. If your hair is out of place, and you glare at the mirror and demand that it show you something neater, the mirror will not obey the demand. It can only ever obey the face. So you reach up, you fix the hair yourself, and only then does the reflection change. And it changes instantly, without argument, without delay, because that is simply what mirrors do. They do not resist, they do not negotiate, they only ever repeat exactly what is placed in front of them. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that your outer finances behave with that exact same quiet obedience. So this week, notice the pattern that keeps repeating in your own finances, the same shortfall, the same delay, the same near miss. And instead of blaming the mirror, ask what quiet belief about myself is standing in front of the glass, creating this exact shape. Is it a belief that says, I always just miss it? Is it a belief that says, money is hard for people like me? Is it a belief inherited from a parent who said it first, sitting at their own kitchen table with their own tight voice? Whatever it is, pause for a moment right now and name it honestly, just to yourself. Because a belief that has finally been spoken plainly is a belief that has already begun losing its grip. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the moment you consciously deny the old belief and consciously claim the new one, the mirror has no choice but to change its picture, because a mirror does not negotiate. A mirror only ever reflects, so speak the new belief plainly today. Say, I am the kind of person wealth flows toward easily. Say it while you fix your hair in your own mirror if it helps you feel the parallel. And keep saying it until the face you are showing the glass has actually changed. Because once the face changes, the reflection has no power left to stay the same. And that is why the third key matters so much, because it will show you exactly where that face gets built in the first place. I am the face behind the mirror, and I choose the face that wealth flows toward. The third key is this. Before any harvest shows itself above the ground, the whole story is decided beneath it. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word is a seed, and consciousness is the soil, and no farmer stands over freshly planted ground shouting at it to hurry. The farmer waters, the farmer tends, the farmer trusts the process, even while the soil looks completely empty on the surface. But so many people treat their own words the opposite way. They speak a hopeful word once, glance at their bank account 5 minutes later, see no change, and immediately plant a fresh seed of doubt right on top of the first one. So nothing has time to root, nothing has time to grow. The ground stays turned over and disturbed forever. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is precisely why so many prayers seem to go unanswered, not because supply is slow, but because the one praying keeps digging the seed back up to check on it. Consider a woman who applies for a position she truly wants. She speaks her claim the night before. Something simple. This position is already mine in divine right. And she means it fully when she says it. But the very next morning she checks her email, before she has even poured her coffee. Nothing yet. She checks again at 9. Nothing yet. By 11 she has checked 4 more times, and each check carries a small, silent question underneath it. Did it work? Did it really work? And by that evening, she has quietly buried her own seed under 4 or 5 fresh handfuls of doubt, without ever noticing she did it. Florence Scovel Shinn would say she never actually stopped believing on purpose. She simply forgot that a claim spoken once in faith does not need to be rechecked to remain true. A seed does not grow faster because the gardener keeps lifting it out of the soil to inspect the roots. It grows slower, or it does not grow at all, because it is never left undisturbed long enough to take hold. Think also of water set to boil on a stove. Lift the lid every few minutes to check on it, and you only ever let the heat escape. Leave the lid resting quietly in place, and the same water reaches its boil in its own good time. Consciousness behaves the very same way. The anxious lifting of the lid, the anxious digging at the soil, the anxious refreshing of the inbox. These do not speed anything along. They only release the very warmth that was doing the work. So this week, practice this exercise. Pick one single financial desire, something real, a bill you want cleared, an opportunity you want opened, and speak your claim over it once, fully, with feeling, and then let it rest. Do not check on it every hour with anxious eyes. Do not retell your worried friends the whole story again and again. Treat it the way a farmer treats a planted field. Water it once a day with a calm, repeated word, and otherwise leave the soil alone to do what soil has always known how to do. And if the old habit of checking rises up in you, as it will, do not scold yourself for it. Simply notice it gently and return to the one settled word. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a single seed planted once in genuine faith carries more life in it than 100 seeds scattered nervously across the same small patch of ground in a single afternoon. The soil was never the problem, the disturbance was the problem, and consciousness, once truly convinced, becomes the fertile ground. And a fertile ground planted once in faith will always outperform a doubtful ground planted 10 times before evening. I plant my word once, and I let the unseen do what it already knows how to do. The fourth key is this: wealth is not something you go out and find. Wealth is something you become, and then it finds you. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that no amount of outer effort will ever outrun an inner identity that has not yet agreed to be wealthy. This is the deepest key so far. So let us unfold it slowly, in pieces, the way a letter is unfolded when you want to read every line. First, consider that most people were handed their financial identity before they were even old enough to question it. A household where money was spoken of only in tight voices at the kitchen table. A parent who sighed every time a bill arrived. A childhood where the phrase, "we cannot afford," that was said so often it became furniture in the mind. Sit with that image for a moment. A child sitting at the dinner table, hearing that sentence land again and again. Not once, not twice, but hundreds of times across years of ordinary evenings. Until the sentence is no longer even heard as a sentence at all, it becomes simply the temperature of the room, the way the walls feel, the way money itself feels. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that whatever is absorbed without argument in those early years becomes the silent architecture of the adult self-concept. So a grown woman today can be earning a perfectly respectable income and still feel a tight, familiar panic every time she opens her banking app, not because the number is actually bad, but because the old identity installed in childhood is still sitting quietly at the control panel, whispering the same old sentence it has whispered for 30 years. We cannot afford that, and no amount of raises will fully satisfy an identity that was never given permission to feel safe with money in the first place. The raise arrives, and the panic simply finds a new object to attach itself to, because the identity underneath was never actually addressed. Second, consider the ordinary shape of a single day lived inside a poverty identity versus a day lived inside a wealth identity, because this is where the teaching stops being abstract and becomes something you can actually catch yourself doing. Picture the poverty identity waking at 7, and before the feet even touch the floor, the mind is already doing math, already subtracting, already bracing. By 8, it is standing in the coffee line, calculating whether the $4 is really necessary today. By 10, it is glancing at an email from a coworker announcing a promotion and feeling something small and sour tighten in the chest. By noon, it is watching a colleague unwrap a new bag and feeling a private ache it will not admit to anyone. By 2, it is putting something back on the grocery shelf, not because it truly cannot be afforded, but because some old inherited voice says people like us do not buy things like that. By 3, it is opening an email from the bank with a held breath and a clenched jaw. By 5, it is driving home rehearsing an argument about a bill that has not even happened yet. By 7, it is scrolling past a beautiful home online and closing the tab quickly, telling itself that is not for people like me. By 10, it is lying in bed running the same worried numbers one more time before sleep. Now picture the wealth identity moving through that same exact day, waking at 7 and stretching, not because the bank account is necessarily larger yet, but because the identity itself has settled. By 8, it orders the coffee without the silent math, not from recklessness but from quiet trust. By 10, it sees the co-worker's promotion and feels a real, unforced gladness, because abundance witnessed anywhere is proof abundance is real everywhere. By noon, it sees the colleague's new bag and simply enjoys it as beauty in the room. By 2, it picks up the very same item on the grocery shelf and places it in the cart without a single flinch. By 3, it opens the bank email calmly, curious rather than afraid. By 5, it drives home thinking of nothing in particular. By 7, it looks at the beautiful home online and thinks, that is the kind of thing that is on its way to me. By 10, it drifts to sleep with a soft, wordless gratitude. Notice, Florence Scovel Shinn would say, that the outer bank balance in both versions of that day may be nearly identical. The entire difference, every single hour of it, was the identity wearing the day, not the day itself. Third, consider a second story. A man standing in a fine clothing store, looking at a well-made suit. The poverty identity inside him does the arithmetic before the salesperson even approaches. It whispers, "This is not for someone like me." It moves his feet toward the exit before his hand has even touched the fabric, and he leaves, telling himself he simply did not need a new suit today. But Florence Scovel Shinn would ask him gently to look again. Was it truly the money, or was it an old identity that has never once felt entitled to walk confidently into a room built for people it secretly believes are above him? Now picture that same man, having done the quiet daily work of this key for a season, walking into that very same store, running his hand over the same fabric, and feeling nothing strange at all, simply a calm, unremarkable sense of belonging. The suit may or may not be purchased that day, but the identity standing inside the store has completely changed, and Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this quiet sense of belonging in a room is worth more than any single purchase, because it is the very thing that eventually makes every purchase, every opportunity, every door, feel simply natural rather than borrowed. Fourth, consider that this means the actual work in front of you this week is not to hustle harder at the outer level. Though right action always has its place, the deeper work is to catch the old identity mid-sentence, the moment it whispers we cannot afford that, or that is not for people like me, and to gently, firmly answer it with a new sentence, out loud if you can, silently if you must. Something as simple as that: identity is not mine anymore. I am someone wealth is drawn to. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the false self must be allowed to die in exactly this way. Quietly, kindly, without drama. It is not a death of the body or a death to be feared. It is the dissolving of an old, borrowed identity, so that the true, deserving self underneath it is finally set free to receive. And every single time you catch the old sentence and replace it with the new one, you are not performing a nice little mental trick. You are literally reassigning which identity gets to wear your day, which identity gets to answer the phone when opportunity calls, which identity gets to walk into the room when the deal is on the table. Fifth, consider that an identity does not only shape how you feel about money, it shapes what you are even capable of noticing. The wealth identity walks past the very same street the poverty identity has walked past for years, and suddenly sees the storefront for lease, the flyer for the workshop, the friend who happens to mention exactly the connection that was needed. None of it was hidden. All of it was always right there. But a closed identity simply does not have eyes for a door it has already decided is not meant for it. This is precisely why two people can live in the same city, walk the same streets, read the same newspapers, and one seems to keep colliding with lucky openings, while the other insists nothing ever comes her way. It is never that supply skipped her, it is that her identity had not yet agreed to look up. Sixth, consider the woman we opened with, the one whose stomach tightens at her banking app. Imagine her doing this exact exchange 40 times a day for 30 days. Catching the old sentence, replacing it, catching it again, replacing it again. At first it feels almost silly, almost too small to matter. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that consciousness is built exactly the way a callus is built, not in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of small, repeated contacts, and by the end of 30 days, that woman opens her banking app and notices, almost by surprise, that her stomach did not tighten this time, and that is not a coincidence, and that is not luck. That is a new identity finally strong enough to hold the room. And once that identity is in place, wealth is no longer something she is chasing. Wealth has simply become the natural outer expression of the person she has quietly, patiently become on the inside. Which is exactly what Florence Scovel Shinn meant when she taught that, as within, so without, and as above, so below. I release the identity that was never truly mine, and I claim the one that wealth already recognizes. If this key is opening something in you, and you want the next teaching to actually reach you, subscribe now, so it finds you the moment it is ready. The fifth key is this. Faith is not a feeling you wait to arrive. Faith is an action you take before the feeling shows up. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most people have this exact order turned backwards in their own minds. They wait to feel confident before they act confident. They wait to feel wealthy before they act wealthy. They wait to feel forgiven before they act forgiven. And they spend years standing at the edge of the water, waiting for courage to arrive before they will finally step in. But courage was never going to arrive first. Courage arrives the moment the foot actually moves. Consider a locksmith standing in front of an old, stubborn lock. He does not stand there for an hour hoping the lock will feel like opening today. He does not ask the lock how it feels about being turned. He simply places the key and turns it, firmly, plainly, with no emotional negotiation required, and the lock, having no opinion of its own, simply opens, because that is what a properly turned key causes to happen regardless of mood. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that your spoken word, and the small brave action that so often accompanies it, functions exactly like that key. It does not need your doubt's permission to work. It only needs to be turned. Now picture an ordinary woman with an invoice sitting unsent on her desk for 11 days. Every single morning, she opens her laptop, looks at the draft, feels a small tightening in her chest, and closes the laptop again, telling herself she will send it once she feels a little more sure of herself, once she feels a little braver, once the fear settles down first. But the fear never settles down first. Fear rarely ever settles down first. It only ever settles down after the action has already been taken. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is precisely where so many people quietly stall out for years, waiting at the edge of a decision for a feeling that was only ever going to be produced by the decision itself. On the 12th day, still trembling a little, still unsure, she sends the invoice anyway, and something curious happens. The moment her finger leaves the mouse, before the client has even replied, before a single dollar has moved anywhere, the tightness in her chest quietly begins to loosen, not because the outer circumstance has changed yet, but because she has finally turned the key, and the feeling of faith, which could never lead, has now finally been given permission to follow. So this week, do not wait for fear to fully clear out of the room before you speak your word or take your step. Make the call while your hands are still a little unsteady. Send the message while your stomach is still a little tight. Open the account you keep avoiding while your breath is still shallow. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that right action taken in faith is itself a spoken word, a decree made with the hands instead of the mouth. And the lock does not care whether your hand was trembling when it turned. It only cares that it turned. I turn the key today, and I let the feeling of faith follow the action of faith. The sixth key is this. Supply is never actually the problem. The gate you have built against receiving it is the problem. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the river of substance is always flowing, always full, always available. The entire question is never whether the river has enough water. The entire question is whether you have left your gate open to receive it. So many people spend years praying for more water, while quietly, unconsciously, keeping their own gate shut with old fears about not deserving, old guilt about wanting more, old habits of giving their good away the moment it arrives out of some leftover feeling that they should not really keep it. It is not a shortage of supply that keeps most people thin in their finances. It is a narrowness in what they have trained themselves to hold. Consider a man who receives an unexpected bonus at work and within the same week finds 3 urgent reasons to spend every last dollar of it. The car needs something, a relative needs something, an old debt suddenly feels urgent again, and he calls this responsible, and sometimes it truly is. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that it is worth asking honestly whether some of that urgency was really necessity, or whether it was an old, hidden discomfort with holding wealth, a gate closing itself the moment the river actually arrived, because a person who has never made peace with receiving will always find a reason to let the water pass through their hands without pooling. Now picture a second version of that very same week. A woman receives an almost identical bonus, and the moment it lands in her account, an old familiar voice rises up inside her and says, "You should not really keep all of this. Someone else needs it more." So she calls her sister and offers half of it before she has even had a full day to simply sit with having it. She tells herself, this is generosity, and generosity is beautiful. Florence Scovel Shinn never once taught against giving, but she did teach that giving born of guilt is not the same as giving born of overflow. One closes the gate in the very act of appearing to open the hand. The other opens the gate even wider because it gives from a place that already feels full. So the honest question is never, am I generous enough? The honest question is, did I let the water pool in me first? Before I decided how it should move? Think for a moment of an ordinary Tuesday. A small refund check arrives in the mail, completely unexpected. And watch how quickly the mind starts working. One part of you wants to feel simple, uncomplicated joy, and almost immediately, another part of you starts explaining the money away. It is not that much anyway. It will just go toward the electric bill. I should not get excited over something so small. And Florence Scovel Shinn would say, notice that voice. That voice is the gate closing in real time. That small, quiet, almost polite refusal to simply enjoy having received something is the very habit that keeps the river thin in your experience, even while it remains full in truth. Now, follow that same Tuesday a little further, because the gate rarely closes just once. By the time the woman deposits that small refund check, she has already, without noticing, closed the gate 3 separate times before lunch. Once when she minimized the check itself, once when she felt a flicker of guilt for being glad about it, and once more when she quietly decided not to mention it to her husband because it felt silly to celebrate something so small. None of these moments feel dramatic. None of them feel like a decision at all. They feel like nothing. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is exactly how a gate stays shut for years without anyone ever noticing it is shut. Not through one loud refusal, but through 100 quiet little ones, each so small it never even asks to be examined. This happens in smaller ways too, and this is where the gate hides most successfully. Someone offers you a genuine compliment, and watch how fast the hand moves to deflect it. Oh, it was nothing. I got it on sale. It is really not that impressive. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that learning to receive gracefully is its own spiritual discipline, every bit as important as learning to give generously, because the way you receive a small compliment is quietly training the very same muscle that decides how you receive a large check. If the muscle is trained to deflect and minimize, it will deflect and minimize the compliment today and the raise next year. Using the exact same motion without you ever noticing it is the same gate closing both times. Picture that same muscle at work in a job interview. A hiring manager tells a candidate her portfolio is genuinely impressive, and instead of simply receiving the words, the candidate immediately explains that she got lucky with the timing, that anyone could have done it, that it was really a team effort. And Florence Scovel Shinn would gently point out that this candidate has just practiced closing her own gate in front of the very person who might have opened the largest door of her year, not because the manager withdrew the offer, but because a person who cannot receive a sentence of praise gracefully has not yet built the inner room large enough to comfortably receive an outer opportunity of that size. The gate and the room are the very same structure wearing two different names. So this week, practice letting a small amount of unexpected good simply stay with you without immediately explaining it away or giving it away out of guilt. If a compliment comes, receive it fully instead of deflecting it. Say only, "Thank you," and let the sentence end there. If a small windfall comes, let some portion of it simply rest in your account for a few days without anxious spending. Notice how that feels. Notice if there is a strange discomfort in letting good things stay, a restlessness, an urge to move the money quickly just to relieve the feeling. And if there is, that discomfort is the gate. Name it gently. Do not fight it. Simply say inwardly, "I am allowed to hold this," and let the sentence do its quiet work. And if you find the old habit returning, as it likely will more than once, do not treat that as proof the key failed. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a gate rusted shut by years of quiet refusal does not swing open easily on the very first try. It opens a little further each time you catch yourself and choose differently. The same way a hinge loosens with patient, repeated use rather than a single hard pull. So let each small practice this week, the received compliment, the check allowed to rest, the good news allowed to simply be good without qualification, be one more gentle turn of that same rusted hinge. It is not the size of the river that determines your wealth. It is the width you have trained your own gate to open. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the river was never lacking. It has been patient this whole time, waiting only for the gate of your own consciousness to finally open all the way, not by force, not by struggle, but by the simple, repeated practice of letting good things land in you and stay a moment before you decide what happens next. And once you understand that the gate was always yours to open, you are ready for the key that shows you exactly how the mouth becomes the hand that opens it. I open my own gate, and I let the river, that was always full, finally reach me. The seventh key is this, and it is the deepest one we will walk through together. So let us take it slowly, in careful pieces, the way you would carry something valuable across a room. First, consider that Florence Scovel Shinn taught the phrase that has become almost a signature of her whole teaching, that the word is a mold, and the substance which fills that mold is God, or if you prefer plainer language, is the great unformed supply of the universe itself, meaning every single time you speak, whether you notice it or not, you are pouring shape into that unformed substance. Most people speak all day long without ever realizing they are constantly casting molds. I am so broke. Easy come, easy go. Money burns a hole in my pocket. I will never get ahead. These are not harmless little sayings. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that each one is a precise mold, cast in the exact shape of its own words, and the substance, being obedient and impartial, simply fills whatever shape it is given. It does not argue with you. It does not check whether you meant it. It fills the mold exactly as spoken, which means the wealthy-sounding sentence and the poverty-sounding sentence are equally powerful. The substance does not prefer one over the other. It only ever fills what it is given. Second, consider an ordinary week lived by two neighbors on the very same street, both facing a nearly identical unexpected expense. The first neighbor, hearing about the expense, says out loud, "Of course this happens to me. Nothing ever goes smoothly. I am always one step behind." And watch what happens next in her week. A second expense appears almost as if summoned. A small argument breaks out over the money. A friend cancels plans citing her own financial strain. And by Friday, the first neighbor is exhausted and says, "See, I told you, it is always something." And Florence Scovel Shinn would say gently, "Yes, you told the universe exactly what shape to build, and it built it." faithfully, obediently. The second neighbor, hearing about the very same kind of expense, pauses, breathes, and says out loud, "This is only a temporary ripple. Supply is unlimited, and it is already moving to cover this." And watch her week instead. A forgotten refund arrives in the mail. A client pays an invoice 2 weeks early. A friend insists on picking up the dinner bill without being asked. And by Friday she says, "See, it always works out." And Florence Scovel Shinn would say, "Yes, because you spoke the mold." And the same obedient substance filled that one too. The expense was nearly identical. The outer facts were nearly identical. The entire difference across that whole week was the mold each mouth chose to cast. Third, consider a small shopkeeper named Grace, who sells handmade candles from a little counter near her front window. For years she has answered every compliment on her candles with the same small sentence, "Oh, it is really just a hobby, nothing fancy." And she prices them low, apologetically low, because somewhere inside her the words, "nothing fancy," have already built the mold her income must fill. One afternoon, a customer offers to pay full price without blinking, and Grace hears herself say, "Oh, you do not have to pay that much. It is really not worth that." And the customer, confused, simply pays the lower price Grace insisted on. Florence Scovel Shinn would say that Grace did not lose that money to the customer. She lost it to her own mouth. The mold was cast the moment she called her own gift small, and no amount of skill in her hands could out-earn the smallness she kept speaking over her own work, until the day she catches herself mid-sentence, and instead says, "This candle is crafted with real care, and it is worth every bit of its price." And slowly, candle by candle, week by week, her income begins rising to match the new shape she has finally dared to speak. Fourth, let us walk through one entire ordinary day and count the molds cast in it, the way you might count coins spilled across a table, because this is where the teaching stops sounding poetic and starts sounding uncomfortably familiar. A man wakes, and the very first thought crossing his mind is another day, another dollar, spoken lightly, almost as a joke, but a mold nonetheless. At breakfast, his child asks for a small treat, and he sighs, "We will see. Money does not grow on trees." Another mold. On the drive to work, he passes a beautiful home and mutters under his breath, "Must be nice. Some people have all the luck." Another mold. At his desk, a coworker mentions a bonus, and he says, "Must be nice for some. Wish that happened for the rest of us." Another mold. At lunch, he opens his wallet, counts what is left, and says quietly to himself, "This has to last me." Another mold. In the afternoon, a bill notification appears on his phone, and he says, "Of course, right on time." Another mold. By the time he drives home, he has spoken some version of lack or scarcity, perhaps a dozen times, without once raising his voice or seeming upset. It all felt so ordinary, so unremarkable, that he would be genuinely startled to be told he had spent the entire day quietly building a house out of exactly the materials he keeps saying he does not have enough of. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is precisely how the mold gets cast most often, not in one dramatic outburst, but in a dozen small, unnoticed murmurs strung together across an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. And this is precisely why the remedy cannot be a single dramatic prayer spoken once a week either. It must be a watchfulness carried gently through the ordinary hours, the very same hours where the old mold was quietly being built all along. Fifth, consider that this teaching demands total honesty about the small sentences you allow yourself to say when no one important seems to be listening. The tired little jokes about being broke, the automatic sigh when a bill arrives, the offhand comment to a coworker that you will never be able to afford a vacation like that, the quick text to a friend that simply says, "Ugh, I am so broke this month," sent so casually, it barely registers as a sentence at all. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the universe does not grade your speech on whether you were joking or whether you typed it instead of spoke it. It simply takes the mold as given and fills it. The written word is still a spoken word. The thumb typing on a screen is still a mouth casting a shape. So this week, pause for a moment and pick one real sentence you catch yourself saying or typing about money, almost on autopilot. Maybe it is, "I never have enough." Maybe it is, "Things like that never happen to me." Write it down honestly, look at it plainly, and then consciously build its replacement, something specific, something you can actually say with a straight face, such as supply flows to me from expected and unexpected directions, and practice saying the replacement in the exact moments the old sentence used to appear, when the bill arrives, when the coworker mentions the vacation, when the old joke tries to slip out at dinner or the thumb reaches for the phone. Catch it, replace it, every single time, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is not decoration, this is architecture. You are literally rebuilding the mold you have been unconsciously handing to the universe for years. Sixth, consider that even our prayers can quietly cast the wrong mold if we are not watching the words closely. A person kneels and says, "Please do not let this bill overwhelm me. Please do not let us lose the house." And the words "please do not let" are still, underneath their good intention, painting a picture of overwhelm and loss in vivid detail. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the substance fills the picture painted, not the fear behind it. So the very prayer meant to protect can accidentally reinforce the very thing it is trying to avoid. This does not mean your prayers were wrong or unloving. It simply means the wording can be lifted higher. Instead of "please do not let this bill overwhelm me," the higher word is "supply already covers this bill completely, and I am at peace." The feeling underneath both sentences may be the same tender wish for safety, but the mold cast is entirely different. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that it is always worth the small effort of choosing the higher wording, because the substance is listening far more literally than we usually remember. And this same lifting applies to the small prayers we barely notice we are praying. The muttered "please, just let this card go through at the register." The whispered, "Please do not let them notice the mistake." Each one can be lifted the very same way, from "please do not let" into "supply already covers this," from "please just let" into "this is already handled." Small shifts in wording, and yet Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the substance responds to the shape of the sentence far more than it responds to the intensity of the emotion behind it. Seventh, consider that there is a second layer to this same key that many people never reach, because it is not only your own words that shape your substance, it is also the words you allow to be spoken over you and about you, without correction. If someone says to you, "You will never get ahead with your history," and you simply nod and let it stand, Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a mold has just been cast over you by another mouth, and unless you consciously deny it and reclaim your own word, the substance may very well begin filling that borrowed shape too. This does not mean living in fear of every careless comment. It means developing the quiet habit of gently, internally, correcting anything spoken over you that does not match the wealth you are claiming. Someone can say the economy is terrible for people like us, and you do not need to argue with them out loud. But inwardly you say, "That is not my word. My word is that supply is unlimited for me regardless of headlines." And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this inward correction, practiced consistently, protects your mold from being shaped by every voice that happens to pass through your day. And this protection matters most inside the rooms you cannot simply leave. The family dinner where an uncle jokes that no one in this family ever gets ahead. The office break room where everyone agrees that raises never really come. The group chat where the running joke is always about being broke. You do not need to correct these rooms out loud. You only need to correct them quietly within yourself, every single time, so that the mold being cast in the air of that room never becomes the mold that settles into your own substance. Eighth, And this is where the key finally turns all the way. Consider that the reason this teaching is called the deepest one is because it asks you to take full, unshared responsibility for every mold you have ever cast, not to shame yourself over the years of accidental poverty speech. Florence Scovel Shinn never taught guilt, she taught correction, but to finally stop outsourcing the blame to luck, to timing, to other people, to the economy, and to stand plainly in front of your own mouth and say, "This has been the missing instrument the entire time, not my resume, not my circumstances, not my family history, my own spoken word." And once you stand there and truly own that, the most freeing feeling arrives right behind it, because if your mouth built the old mold, your mouth can build a new one starting today, this very hour, with the next sentence you choose to speak. And that is not a burden. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that it is the most hopeful news a person could ever receive, because it means you were never actually trapped by anything outside yourself at all. The shopkeeper was never trapped by the market. The anxious neighbor was never trapped by bad luck. The tired man was never trapped by his job. And you have never been trapped by your bank balance. You have only ever been shaping it, sentence by sentence, coin by unnoticed coin. And you may begin shaping it differently, starting with your very next word. Not tomorrow, not once the mood strikes, but with the very next sentence that leaves your mouth or your thumb after you finish hearing this. My word is the mold, and I fill it today with wealth, with ease, and with grace. The eighth key is this: patience is not passive waiting. Patience is active, faithful expectancy. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there is a world of difference between a person who waits anxiously, checking constantly, and a person who waits expectantly, resting in the quiet certainty that the thing spoken is already arranged. And this difference, small as it sounds, is actually the whole hinge on which supply either flows freely or gets tangled in its own delivery. Consider the difference between a woman waiting for a delayed flight, who paces the gate every 3 minutes, sighing loudly, checking the board again and again, as though her anxious watching might somehow speed the plane, and a second woman at the very same gate, who has already claimed her seat in her mind, who orders a coffee, opens a book, and simply trusts the process she has no control over anyway. Both women board the exact same flight at the exact same time. The anxious watching changed nothing about the actual arrival. It only changed how peacefully or painfully the waiting was experienced. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is precisely how supply behaves too. Once the word has been spoken in faith, once the claim has been made, the anxious checking adds nothing to the timeline. It only adds suffering to the wait. Now widen that same picture into an ordinary week, because this key rarely shows itself in something as obvious as an airport. It shows itself in the small, repeated moments most people never even notice they are living inside of. Picture a man who has spoken his word over a job application on a Monday morning, calmly, plainly, fully believing it is already handled. By Tuesday afternoon, he finds himself checking his email 17 times before lunch. By Wednesday, he has quietly rehearsed 3 different disappointed reactions in his mind before any answer has even arrived. By Thursday, he is short with his family over something small and unrelated, because the tension of the unanswered waiting has been leaking out sideways into every corner of his day. And by Friday, when the answer finally comes, he receives it not with peace, but with relief, which is a very different feeling altogether. Relief is the sound of a held breath finally let go. Peace is the sound of a breath that was never actually held in the first place. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the second kind of waiting is the one that actually protects and strengthens the mold you have spoken, while the first kind quietly disturbs it, hour by hour, before it has even had the chance to fully set. So this week, notice where you are pacing the gate over something you have already spoken your word about: a job application, a payment you are expecting, an opportunity you have already claimed, and practice consciously sitting down at that gate instead. Order the metaphorical coffee. Open the metaphorical book. Remind yourself that the flight was never late because of your pacing, and it will never arrive early because of your pacing either. Your only real job once the word is spoken is to hold the state of already having received, while the outer mechanics quietly catch up to match it. And here is a simple, practical way to practice this. Whenever you catch yourself checking too soon, checking too often, reaching for the phone or the mailbox or the inbox, out of nervous habit rather than genuine reason, pause right there and say quietly to yourself, "It is already arranged," and then physically turn your attention to something else entirely. Water a plant, wash a dish, step outside for a moment. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith is proven far more by where you place your attention while you wait than by what you say in the one dramatic moment you first claimed your desire. A claim spoken once in faith and then buried under a week of anxious watching is like a seed planted carefully and then dug up every few hours to see if it has sprouted yet. Nothing given that kind of treatment ever gets the chance to root. Think also of the ordinary rhythm of the tide. It never rushes the shore out of impatience, and it never lingers past its appointed hour out of hesitation either. It simply moves on its own perfect, unhurried timing, entirely unconcerned with whether anyone standing on the beach believes it will arrive. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that supply moves in exactly this same unhurried, faithful rhythm. Once your word has truly set it into motion, your pacing does not delay the tide, and your peace does not delay it either. But your peace does make the waiting a place you can actually live inside of comfortably, rather than a place you are constantly trying to escape. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this settled expectancy is itself a form of faith so strong it does not need constant reassurance. And ironically, it is often the very people who have stopped anxiously checking who suddenly find their answer arriving, not because the anxious checking was somehow keeping the answer away out of spite, but because the peaceful state itself is a truer, cleaner mold, undisturbed by the static of fear. And a mold left undisturbed always sets more perfectly than one that keeps getting poked and reopened before it has had time to hold its shape. I rest in expectancy, and I let the unseen mechanics arrive on their own perfect time. The ninth key is this: you were never waiting to become the chosen one. You were only ever waiting to remember that you already are. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the very last step in this whole teaching is the quiet, almost startling recognition that the sign you kept seeing was never trying to convince you that something special was coming from outside. It was always trying to wake you up to something special that had been sitting inside you the entire time. Picture an ordinary kitchen table in an ordinary home. Nothing about the room looks remarkable. A chipped mug, a folded newspaper, the small hum of a refrigerator in the next room. And yet Florence Scovel Shinn taught that it is entirely possible for the person sitting at that plain table, cup of coffee in hand, morning light falling across an unremarkable chair, to carry within them a consciousness so settled, so wealthy, so certain of supply, that the whole room is quietly, invisibly crowned by their presence in it. Wealth was never a title handed out by circumstance. Wealth is a consciousness, carried into any room, no matter how plain that room appears. Consider a man named Walter, who spent 30 years believing the crown was reserved for someone else entirely, someone with a bigger house, a louder title, a longer resume. Every morning he sat at his own small table and quietly excused himself from his own good, telling himself that wealth belonged to a different kind of person than the one looking back at him in the toaster's dull reflection. He was not lazy, he was not careless. He simply never once considered that the very chair he sat in every single morning was already the seat of the chosen one. And Florence Scovel Shinn would say that this is the strange, gentle sadness underneath so many ordinary lives, Not that the crown was ever taken away, but that it was never once put on, because no one had told him it had been resting there the whole time, waiting patiently for him to simply reach up and notice it. Now picture Walter one ordinary Tuesday, older now, having finally done the quiet inner work these 9 keys describe, sitting at that same table, in that same chair, with the same chipped mug in his hand, and nothing about the room has changed. The walls are the same walls, the light falls the same way it always has, and yet everything has changed, because the man sitting there has finally agreed to be who he already was. He no longer waits for a bigger house to feel entitled to ease. He no longer waits for a louder title to feel entitled to peace. He simply sits, crowned, in the plainest room he owns, and Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is the whole secret hiding in plain sight the entire time. The crown was never going to arrive with better furniture. It was only ever going to arrive with a truer thought. It is not a grander room that makes a person wealthy. It is a wealthier consciousness that makes any room enough. It is not a louder title that earns the crown. It is a quieter certainty that was wearing it all along. So this week, sit at your own ordinary table, in your own ordinary chair, and practice wearing the crown that was never actually missing. Not with arrogance, not with performance, but with the same simple, settled certainty of someone who has finally stopped auditioning for a role they were cast in long ago. Let the sign you have been seeing this whole time finally rest. Let it have done its work. Its work was only ever to point you back to yourself. And now that you have arrived there, wealth is no longer something coming toward a chosen one somewhere out ahead of you. Wealth is something rising up quietly from the chosen one who has been sitting right here the whole time. I wear the crown that was never missing, and I let wealth rise from right where I already am. Here is the whole picture. It is not the sign that saves you. It is the receipt behind the sign that you finally learn to trust. It is not the outer world correcting itself. It is the mirror finally shown a new face. It is not a seed dug up and doubted. It is a seed planted once and left to root in peace. It is not an old identity fought against forever. It is an old identity gently let go, so the true one can finally stand up. It is not a feeling waited for. It is a key turned before the feeling arrives. It is not a river that runs dry. It is a gate that finally learns to open. It is not the mouth speaking by accident. It is the mouth finally speaking on purpose. It is not anxious watching that brings the answer. It is peaceful expectancy that lets it land. And it is not a crown given later to someone more deserving. It is the crown you were wearing this entire time, and when you look closely at all 9 of these, you will notice they were never 9 separate keys at all. They were 9 turns of the very same key, and that one key, the only one that ever truly mattered underneath all the rest, is simply this: your own consciousness, spoken aloud and believed within, is the one true maker of your wealth. If you want this teaching to keep unfolding for you day by day, in your own voice, in your own hands, that is exactly what the Overflow Covenant was built to be, a gentle daily companion of decrees, reflections, and Florence Scovel Shinn's own wisdom carried into modern language. So this work does not stay a single video you watched once, but becomes a living practice you return to. It is available now for a simple one-time gift of $27, fully backed by a 30-day peace of mind guarantee. So there is truly nothing to risk and everything to gain. You will find the link in the description below, and I hope you will let it become part of how you build the wealth consciousness you have already begun claiming today. Say it once more with me now, wherever you are. I am the chosen vessel for my own good. Wealth is already coming to meet me. My word is my wand. And so, the sign you kept seeing was never a stranger knocking on someone else's door. It was always wealth, quietly, patiently, lovingly, coming to meet you.